Infinite Affiliate Professor, University of Washington, Seattle Advisor, several. Oh, you can just speak about yourself. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. In this presentation, I'll talk about a little bit about myself first. I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about me, and then about my own company, and then I'll discuss some research we are doing on blockchain impact, and then I'll talk about the companies that I've been working with. So I'm basically an economist. My name is Badri Narayanan. You can call me Badri, that's easier. And I have a PhD in economics, and I used to be a professor at Badri University before in economics. And I moved to Seattle, and I've been doing all this after moving to Seattle. So I work mostly with McKinsey for various projects with the clients mainly on management consulting, business strategy, policy impact, and so on. And I do the same with my own firm. It's Infinite Sum Modeling, and some of our work, in fact most of our work is with public sector organizations, pretty much most of the international organizations like United Nations, World Bank, IMF, European Commission, and the US government organizations like Department of Commerce, Agriculture, and so on. And I also, I'm an academic at heart, so I continue my collaborations with the university. So I have a position in the University of Washington, Seattle, and I help in terms of research. I have some students who are doing PhD and postdocs. In addition, I've been an advisor to the UN and World Bank and a few other organizations, as well as a lot of disruptive technology companies, mostly in the blockchain space and also in the drones and biotech space. So this is just to give a brief overview. And as I already mentioned to you, that I'll first talk about our company, and then I'll talk about a piece of research that we have just completed, and it is going to be presented at World Trade Forum in Florence, Italy. The World Trade Forum is similar to World Economic Forum, but focusing on international trade. So we did some work on trade. How is blockchain applicable for international trade, and also for Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, kind of related. So there's a lot of work going on how can trade promote Sustainable Development Goals, and now we are bringing blockchain into the picture. So I'll talk about that first. And then I'll talk about some use cases we have been directly contributing, trying to collaborate with other stakeholders who are blockchain developers, and also the potential clients in the public sector and so on. So I'll talk about that a little bit. And then I'll come to the companies that I've been advising, and they're all doing some interesting work. So they're all very different sectors, so I'll be talking about them. Hopefully that will keep the talk more interesting than just the economic stuff I'm going to talk. So this is our company profile. So we are basically a strategic consulting firm, but our focus is the consulting advice that we give is based on economic modeling, data analytics, data science, and artificial intelligence, and we're also doing some work on blockchain. And our clients are basically mostly the public sector organizations, like I mentioned earlier, US government, European Commission, Chinese government, and Singapore, and also some African Development Bank particularly, and Government of India, and several other governments. And we also have several international organizations. So those are our main clients. And we have some multinational companies who are our clients, and startups are basically our main clients. And the kind of work we do for them is basically advising on strategy and thinking about two things. One is how can public policy affect them? Like for example, the various policy changes that are happening today in the US and UK. How would that affect individual companies and sectors? And the other thing is, particularly for the disruptive technology companies like blockchain companies, what kind of difference can they make, these companies make in the whole economy and in specific industries, which can potentially be useful for them for pitching when they talk to clients and so on. So those are the kind of work we have been doing. So one of the main work we have been doing in the recent months, I would say past 1-2 years, is impact of various disruptive technologies, and I'll show you an example now. But our mainstay for a long time, for the past, my own work for the past 2 decades, has been on macroeconomic forecasting analysis and general applied economics, various policy issues. I'm an applied economist, so I work on pretty much a wide range of policy issues. So these are some of our partners. We have some international organizations here, some universities, and also some companies here. So there are many more, but we just showed some of them. So some offerings we have some models based on artificial intelligence for forecasting prices and also not only prices but also production, trade, and so on. So it's basically for macro and trade data, for currencies, and also commodities. And when I say commodities, I talk about all the commodities. So there are around 1,000 commodities we have. And we mostly use machine learning algorithms for them, and we also use AI and econometrics. And these are basically determined globally. So we have a global model, and we can look at what happens to specific countries and specific industries. But we take into account the fact that everything is related to everything else. If something happens in one country, it affects some other country. And this is one of our kind of our main offering particularly for the public sector. It's called a global supply chain economic model. This is something that we developed in collaboration with Purdue University when I was working there. So this is a model which captures it has a lot of, it covers all the major countries in the world. So it covers like 99.9% of the global GDP. So it's pretty much all the countries, and it covers all the sectors in the countries and the relationship between the different sectors. For example, if our US administration is imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum, how would that affect, let's say, textile industry in South Africa? It is possible because South Africa may be buying some steel and aluminum from US or from China, and maybe since US has imposed tariffs, China would now find it more difficult to sell it to US, but it will be easier for it to sell to South Africa. So there will be more availability of steel and aluminum for South Africa. So potentially the prices may become lower for South Africa. So I'm just giving you an example, but these kind of things, how different industries are related to each other and how different countries are related to each other. So all these things are captured in these models, and these are done at a relatively macro level, but still it is good enough for a lot of our analysis. So this is the kind of structure of the kind of models we have. So it basically captures all the transactions in the economy. So you have companies, like people earn money from companies and then they pay money for buying stuff from the company. So basically this, and then you have and actually to produce things you need labor, you need land, you need capital, and you need some resources. So it's a very simplified version of this, and you also need raw materials to produce things. And then raw materials are used by firms, but they also supplied back to the households. So this is a very super simple representation of these models. So you have this happening in one country, but then you also have several countries here. So it's a highly kind of stylized representation, but just to give you an idea of these models. And these are some of our clients. We have worked with many of the top consulting companies. We have worked with McKinsey, also with KPMG, and many of the international organizations, UN, United Nations, and the Singapore government, European Commission, and so on. So, and we also work with universities like Harvard University, London School of Economics, and so on. So, I think enough of talking about our own company, so I'll talk about more real stuff. So these are some policy use cases we have been working on. As I mentioned, a large part of my work has been on public policy. So we have been working with the first one is something we are working with international research institute for focusing on tuber crops based in Nairobi in Kenya, and they want to develop a supply chain management tool for farmers. We have been collaborating with them, and we are trying to find out whether it's how far is blockchain going to be relevant there. But they want blockchain because they've heard about blockchain, they think it's cool, and they want to use it to make the life of farmers easier. Basically, it's not it has to do with the supply chain tracking that we always talk about, but it's also about reducing wastage and getting better prices. The farmers usually lose a lot to the middlemen, and maybe elimination of middlemen is a big thing in blockchain, and maybe we can develop some systems for that. So that's something we have been consulting. We are working on developing a solution and actually some actual blockchain tool along with another partner company. So that is one of the things we are doing. And another thing we have been discussing is about energy markets. So one thing that we have been thinking of is so when we consume electricity, we don't know the source of it. Is it renewable or non-renewable? And states like California, I think LA City, they have been coming up with some ideas like, make most of the power green, like most of the electricity is green and so on. But the problem with that approach is that there may be some people who would voluntarily choose renewables while others may not. So it's better to give the consumers an option as to where does the power come from, where does electricity come from, and that's something we have been discussing with some potential clients on developing something on that. And another interesting thing is about solar energy, something we are discussing in Texas. Every house can have a solar panel, and they can generate electricity for themselves, and the excess electricity can be given back to the grid. Here the thing is, the key thing here is you need to have some proper contracts in place, and that contracts also have to be responsive to, should be designed properly so that the fluctuations in the grid should be taken care of. So it's kind of combining blockchain with AI. You can know what will be the typical load on the grid, and how would it change over time, and so it has to be dynamically accommodated. The grid has to be dynamically arranged, and that is something we have been discussing, how to use blockchain in conjunction with AI for this. So all these are in kind of discussions. We've not made actual products, but ideas. Another thing is on baggage tagging in aviation. So RFID has been quite prominent nowadays, becoming prominent nowadays, but blockchain hasn't been used here, and that's something we discussed with a couple of aviation companies, and they've been interested, and this is still at the concept stage. There are a couple of companies, and I'm going to talk about other companies, but these companies I didn't find time to highlight their work a lot, but just wanted to mention because both of them have to do with public policy. So Digital Town, I think some of you may know because it's based in here, in Seattle, and this is a company which is global, and they've been collaborating with city governments of many countries, and they're developing a blockchain-based system for connecting the citizens with the city government. So it solves all problems starting from identity to transfers to the citizens and so on, and even disaster management. So it's like a wide range of things. Basically, the idea is to connect citizens together in the city. So like one ID to take care of everything. So that's one. And another project I've been working on, a company called Sovereign Union. They're doing some interesting stuff on the small island countries across the world. They've been working with them. They have a lot of resources, but they're actually very poor. They don't have a lot of economic activity. So what they are planning to do is to come up with some blockchain-based solutions maybe some crypto-based solutions to basically actually it's the other way around, asset-backed cryptocurrency. So they have a lot of resources, and one can use those resources to maybe. So they can probably this I think it's not,
Very nice.
better than a presentation.
You have use
Yeah.
cases, yeah, it's good one actually.
So
If baggage tagging, what is that? What is the blockchain doing that?
So
If you
basically,
I would
the
just-
idea is to track the baggage.
Okay.
So to avoid the lost baggages and so on.
Okay.
As of now, RFID is good enough for that.
Yeah.
But we have been thinking about something more
More of
secure,
that.
more secure
More
and
secure.
yeah, more secure.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's the. Yeah. So I was talking about sovereign union. Yeah. So they have. You can look up these two companies. They have their websites. But sovereign union is to basically enable the people, the tribals and the indigenous people living in these island countries to have a kind of a monetary union based on their own cryptocurrency. That is a vision they have, but that's a pretty interesting project that they're doing. So these are all, I put all the public policy things in one slide, and then I'll later talk about many other ideas. So then now I'll talk about the research, a particular paper that we have been working on, and we just finished it recently, and I'm just going to highlight the major findings from that. So the idea of this paper, and this is being presented at World Trade Forum, as I mentioned. So the idea of this paper is to bring blockchain to the mainstream of trade, basically. So it's international. It's the most. It's the biggest trade forum in the world, international trade, and it has people like the head of WTO and all those kind of people there. And we are going to present it there. And the idea is to basically say how blockchain can change things in trade. So basically, it's trust and traceability. Those are the main ideas that appeal to exporters and importers. So what we would think is, if blockchain technologies are implemented in on the ports, like for example, you can have smart ports and so on. What our hypothesis, what we feel is that the developing countries, the exporters, the traders in developing countries can gain a lot, because there is a lot of lot of inefficiencies in their system, and they can be eliminated with blockchain. But even the developed countries can gain, but I think relatively speaking, the developing countries can gain more. There are various things that can change because of blockchain in trade. Can be trade finance, access to finance for exporters is a big topic, particularly in the developing countries again. Particularly countries like exporters in African countries and some Asian countries, they don't even have money for their working capital, and they cannot get access to credit. We did some paper on that and found that promoting access to credit can promote trade a lot in these countries. And so trade finance is one topic. Another topic is customs procedures can all be simplified using blockchain. And the third thing is supply chain tracking, the provenance of goods. So this is a very familiar picture you would have seen. So you can start from like what happens in a traditional system is that the producer sells his product to an exporter, and then he sells it to an importer in another country. It has to cross the border, and then there is a buyer who gets stuff from the importer, and then he finally sells to the customer. So there is a lot of things happening in between. With blockchain, you can actually trace the whole supply chain. So what happens with this is a couple of things that happens. Like, I'm kind of oversimplified it. There is something behind this also. Before producer, this producer is going to depend on other producers. So this producer he may be producing a shirt, and he may be buying, fabric from somebody else, and the fabric guy may be buying cotton from somebody else, and the cotton may be organic or whatever, or we don't know what material it's made of. We just believe in whatever it said. And yesterday we had a nice presentation of how much can we trust the whole thing, what we are eating, what we are wearing, and so on. Right? So it's kind of related to that, but the idea here is there are many trade agreements between countries, and many exporters, particularly the poor country exporters, the developing countries, and also the small exporters in developed countries, they don't have the money to show that they don't have enough money to get certified on what is happening here. So, for example, if a Canadian, it's not a good example. Let's think about a farmer in Ghana is selling potatoes maybe potato chips to US, and US has some kind of free trade agreement with Ghana, right, like economic partnership agreement, where the exporter from Ghana doesn't have to pay import tariffs, customs in US, right? But he can do that only if he can show that the potato chips was like 80% of it was made in Ghana, or 90% of it was made in Ghana. If he cannot show that, he cannot use that, he has to pay the customs. So that is a big problem, and it appears to be like, on the face of it appears to be a small issue, trivial issue, and even many economists think it's not a big deal. There's not a lot of literature on this, but we looked into the data and we found that something like 70% of the free trade agreements are not implemented. On paper you say it's all free, no customs, but in reality they're not implemented because the exporters are not able to show the conditions of the zero customs. So that is where this traceability would help a lot. So they can, if you just have a tag saying that okay, this was made, all of it was made here, or maybe like 10-20% came from somewhere else, then you can just clear the customs without paying anything. So that is one key aspect on the trade side, apart from other things that you already discussed, trade finance and so on. The second thing is how does it relate to Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. This is quite talked about in the public policy circles. So Sustainable Development Goals is basically reducing inequality, improving the environment, improving public health, reducing corruption and so on. So inequality can be reduced because there is going to be more trade. So the poorer countries can export more and they can become richer. So the inequality can come down. So the barriers to trade goes down. And the environment, it also has environmental implications because of the lack of traceability, a lot of food is wasted, and 30% of food is lost from farm to fork. That's a statistic we found, and maybe we can, even if we save like half of it, that can have a huge implication for environment. And the next thing is public health. Access to medicines is a big deal, and the intermediaries are also a problem there. And using blockchain in that area, trade in medicines would also be greatly helpful. They can make the medicines a lot cheaper than and corruption again. In general, there is going to be more transparency, and we all agree that one of the biggest strengths of blockchain is reduce corruption, more efficient governance. So yeah, the customs procedures can be. Now we have so much of paper, and it's difficult to believe, but even today, a large part of trade, like 70-80% of all the transactions are still based on paper and pen. So it's not even not even digital. We are talking about blockchain, which is much more advanced, but that can be like a big game changer. So I'll come to the results that we got from our analysis. So what we did in our analysis is that if blockchain is implemented, what would be we came up with some numbers for productivity, how much will productivity increase, cost will go down at different stages. And based on this, the model that I mentioned earlier, the global supply chain economic model, we came up with these kind of results. So in general, globally, we can have $3 trillion more trade, which is a huge number. To give a perspective, it is like 12% more global trade. So $3 trillion more trade. If you have trade facilitation, like improving trade procedures and so on using blockchain. And interestingly, more than $2 trillion of this is going to be from mostly developing countries. Of course, there are a couple of, like, you have Japan here and you have Australia here, but in general, it's mostly developing countries. And in terms of GDP, which is something we understand more, it's almost the same, like little more, like $3 trillion of GDP. And again, more than half of it comes from these developing countries. And this is actually like 4% of GDP. So just to give you, like, so far I talked about concepts, but just to give you some numbers, this is the numbers that we got, and we're going to present at the World Trade Forum. So now I'll be going to the companies, specific companies and some use cases. But I can take a pause, and if you have any questions on what I discussed so far, I can answer.
Can you go through your methodology as to how you got to those numbers?
Yeah, so what we did was we had a very detailed transaction level data set on like every single commodity, every single shipment from a country A to country B. We got that from International Trade Center, who are our collaborators in Geneva. They have all the data. They collect all the data from all the governments. So we got that, and at that level, you can see what was the tariff that was imposed. What was the custom duty that was actually paid. And from the books, from the procedures, we know what is the actual tariff that is applicable. So we did that at that level, at transaction level, and then we could see when you, so for let's say that on paper it is 0% customs, but actually you are paying like, let's say 5%, right? And that's what, let's say that is what we found for that particular commodity in our data set. Then what we say is that, let's say because of blockchain, it may not we may not reduce at 5% to 0%, but we may at least reduce at 5% to, let's say, 2.5%, right?
Was that just an assumption?
It was an assumption. We did multiple things. One thing was to go to zero, like blockchain will just remove the entire gap. There won't be any gap. Everyone will be able to show that, you know, we produce it in our country and we are eligible for the preferences, right? That is the extreme case, and we did that also. But the numbers that I show here, they are corresponding to a case which is we thought was more realistic. We don't want to be too optimistic. We wanted to be more conservative. So we said, like, let's say 50% of all the gap in what we call as utilization, all the gap in utilization of preferences are improved because of blockchain. Then this will be the results. If I go 100%, then the results will be a little more than this. So it's kind of conservative. And also another interesting thing here is that this is only one part of the blockchain, and we also did some other numbers on reducing the paperwork, the customs procedures, and so on. For that, we had to do. There is a lot of literature on that already in economics literature exists for that, and we took some numbers on what will be the increase in productivity because of, what is the loss of productivity because of all these procedures, and how much can we save because of eliminating them using blockchain. And we also included those numbers. So increase in productivity and reduction in the barriers for trade. So those two things we incorporated, and then we put this number.
What's the mix in terms of net effect? So what percentage does increase efficiency towards cost compared to productivity?
Yeah, that's a great question. More than 70-80% was coming from productivity, increase in productivity. There's the second thing I mentioned, and only like 20-30% comes from the better utilization, the tracking of supply chain and getting a better utilization of preferences. So we have the biggest game changer is basically the paperwork reduction and so on. Basically smart contracts and those kind of things. That's going to be the bigger game changer here. So any other questions? Okay. So now I'll move on to the companies, and I must tell upfront that I'm an advisor to these companies, but I'm not deeply involved with them, so I may not be able to answer very deep questions, but I'll try to just explain broadly, particularly in the areas where I am advising them. So Vermouth is a company which is based in here in Seattle, and their mission is to focus on locally owned businesses. So they want to facilitate the locally owned businesses to begin with in Seattle, but eventually they want to go across the country and maybe across the world. But the idea is to reduce the transaction costs for payments in the local businesses. So basically, what they're developing is it's going to be an Ethereum-based token, utility token, and they're going to have this app already exists. You can download this app in iOS or Android, Vermouth, and Vermouth. The name stands for the name is it's kind of a Latin name, word of mouth. Basically, it means word is word. So basically, they literally want it to be like that. They want people to promote it by itself, like word of mouth. So they've started with restaurants. So right now it's kind of like a TripAdvisor kind of thing. So it's an app in which you have all the restaurants in Seattle, and customers can rate them. So you can have those kind of discussions there. It's kind of like a community where you can rate the restaurants and.
Sorry, is it Vermouth or Vermouth?
It's VER, Vermouth. Yeah.
It's
kind of
it looks like an A.
Yeah, it's a logo thing. Yeah.
It's terrible design.
Yeah, I should tell them. Yeah. It's not my expertise, but it didn't occur to me. It did occur to me first that it looks very strange, but anyway, they wanted to have something here. So, the idea is right now they have this ratings and discussions about reviews and so on. So it pretty much looks like TripAdvisor to some extent. But the idea is what they want to do is eventually they're going to give tokens. They're going to issue tokens for ratings and reviews, and they're also going to issue tokens for purchasing. If a customer buys something using this app, and of course in this app you can directly link in this app you will have multiple options. One is link your bank account to the app, or link credit card to the app. So what we are debating is, if you have a credit card link here, then of course credit card fee is there, and that's the main mission is to avoid that. But so we will discourage that. So when you use credit card, then there will be some transaction fee. But if you don't use credit card, if you directly use the app by loading dollars from your bank account, then it's free. The transaction is free for the consumer and free for the producer. So nobody pays anything. And the consumer gets some tokens, some utility tokens. It's Vermouth tokens. And of course, you all know better than me how tokenomics works. And basically, they want to just at least initially, their focus is to get the business just by expanding the network, and not so much. Then they're going to start in a very idealistic way. They're not going to charge anyone anything. Basically, not charges to the businesses and not charges to the consumers. Eventually, I don't know what will happen, but that's the beginning. And the first thing is they have so you have an identity for the consumers, and they're not just like going and eating and coming back, but they can have their own reviews and so on. And the payment is also very secure, and they also plan to develop more protocols like order, delivery, booking, and reputation, and so on. So that is my first company. Now I'm going to the second one, which is called Market Mogul, which is very important for some of you. So Market Mogul is a company based in London, and they are trying to revolutionize the way the news is produced. So it's a media company, and they have a lot of articles in tech space, in stocks, and all kinds of things, politics, economics, everything. They're basically into crowdsourcing. They're already doing it, and they've begun introducing blockchain here. But what they're doing is anyone can write an article there, anyone can submit an article there, but there will be like a multiple levels of peer review. And when the peer review happens, they make sure that it's not biased. So usually what happens is when you look at news at CNN or any of the outlet we have, it is quite likely and quite possible that there is some there's some view of the organization. The media has to be unbiased, but typically what happens is either the organizations themselves have some views. I don't want to name, but there are many media companies which have some broad ideologies and views. But if that doesn't happen, the individual journalist may have some viewpoints, and of course the editor is going to control the content, but then editor also has a viewpoint, right? So you cannot control all this. But now what they do is they get articles from different people, and the reviewers will not be of the same kind of perspective or thinking. They'll be different. So that will make sure that there will be a consensus-based acceptance of articles. So only if there is consensus, if all the reviewers agree, the article will be published. If they don't agree, then there will be, you send back to the author and it has to be revised and so on. So I'm very familiar with this kind of review being a researcher, because we write articles, we submit, and we get rejected in many of our articles and accepted in some of them, and all this go through a lot of peer review. So it was very appealing to me. And now they are beginning to use blockchain, and they want to. They have issued. I think they are going to issue this utility token, mobile coins, and they're going to have smart contracts and ledger. So the review process is very streamlined and transparent. So you cannot have something. So when the reviewers give their comments, it cannot be like a random rejection. It has to be substantiated. So that is their model, and I found it was very interesting. And I'm advising them on this side, on the blockchain side. And this is another company based in New York City, Kapi, and they are really passionate team of people who are working on introducing blockchain to credit reports. So basically, the credit, it's basically a distributed ledger for credit data. So they collect, and then they got a lot of awards, and I don't want to get into all these details, but they're basically into, so they have this distributed ledger, which is both scalable and internally it's self-sovereign, and it's also transparent, and it is also monetizable. The sharing. So when you choose to share your credit information, now we are sharing our information without getting, like, we don't get paid. In fact, we are charged for something, and like when we buy something, and then our information goes on and on. And here it is actually, it can be monetized. The consumers can actually monetize. And so this is the overview we have. So you upload your data onto the platform, and optionally they can verify. They can verify they can verify the data, and then it is encrypted and stored in the system. So even the employees there cannot see that. And then the buyer then asks for the data, and then it could be, then the purchaser, from the buyer goes to the purchaser, and the purchaser can be any of these banks, lenders, and so on. So and again the once the transaction happens, the customers actually can earn money. So that's the monetization part. So that's the overall system, and I think they have been they're in advanced. They're in advanced stages of development, and I think they're going to launch it in the early next year. So this is another company which is registered in London, Race Network, and they're using a delegated proof of stake. So they wanted to develop something. Develop a blockchain and a cryptocurrency which is both fast and secure. So fast for the consumers at large, the people, and then secure mainly for the businesses. So it's kind of a combination of public and private blockchain, but at the same time, it's very fast, and it's also more decentralized than other. So there are many other things, and one of the important features of this company is to collaborate closely with universities. So, and that is where I'm kind of helping them. We're forging some relationship with universities which are working on blockchain. So because they're more into the technology development side of it, so they really want to be on the cutting edge of speed and transaction security and so on. So basically they are there in the area of improving the balance between speed and security. So it definitely needs some cutting edge research, recent academic research and so on. So we have been collaborating with Badri University and University College London and KIST, the Korean Academy of Science and Technology. So that's this, and then there is another company called Team Blockchain, and this is based in Singapore, and they are basically using GPS in blockchain, and it is also scalable. And one of their points of mission is to reduce the energy consumption. So the problem today is that scalability is an issue, and you also have throughput issues today, and hacking is a big issue of the wallets. And this point was also mentioned in the previous company I mentioned, Race Network. And we also have, and this is the thing that most of us are, even from a policy perspective, I'm always worried about the high energy consumption in mining. And so that's an issue. And then you also have the extent of how much can we go forward in terms of security, privacy, and all. So this is a consensus-based mechanism, and so they have since they have this GPS embedded here. It's geo-fenced smart contracts, and it's very location based, and so the GPS enables them to both increase the performance and also reduce the energy consumption and be very specific to the location. So that's one of the key things of this platform, and so you can have so this is kind of the evolution, right? So transactions was the main thing when it started, and then smart contracts became a big thing after Ethereum came to place in 2013, and now what they're saying is that with them, once they are here, they are now talking about GPS network and geonodes. So that is kind of the next thing that is coming up, and they are also in advanced stages. And so transaction, smart contract, security, network app. So the usual blockchain app. So it's kind of a general platform where you can do these things. And they already got a few. They have been doing some pilot projects. One with, I cannot reveal the names of these companies, clients, but I think you can easily guess. So they developed this blockchain solution for this company, an e-commerce company, which is the largest in Asia, and they saved like around $30 million every day. And taxi service is also saving a lot of time with the wallet that is geo specific, the location specific. And there is a Singapore-based company for which they're doing some payments business. And that again, they haven't quantified the savings, but of course the transactions are very quick. So those are. So then I'm finally just going to outline a couple of, so far I talked about product-based companies. These are all, they're developing products, platforms and so on. And there are a couple of companies where, this is a company I'm working with called Avatar Blockchain and Data Analytics. It's based in LA, and this is the company which is helping me on my own blockchain projects. Whenever I want to develop some blockchain, they help me, and I'm kind of very close partners with them. And they're into many types of technology businesses. And I think that is an important thing for blockchain consulting, I feel, because the blockchain solutions many times end kind of a dead end. It's a dead end because you don't have you cannot do everything with blockchain. You need some support with other technologies. So, for example, yesterday when we had this transparent path discussion on food tracking of food sources and so on. With blockchain, they came up with a nice solution. You can actually be very sure about what is happening, where is the food coming from. But it would be even better if you combine blockchain with IoT. Let's say, for example, kind of a drone IoT, and maybe also some drone applications where you can actually have some video. So have some video of what is actually happening there. Like if you are thinking about meat, then they can see how are the slaughterhouses. And if you talk about agriculture, you can see how are the fields managed and so on. So this kind of combination of multiple technologies is something that I think is very essential, and that's why I think I like these kind of consulting companies which are into both blockchain and other things. So yeah, this is there, and also it's important to go from like for example in the use cases that I mentioned before, in which I am personally working on, we are mostly in this other stage. We're talking about, we are sitting with the clients, discussing, is blockchain needed at all here, and the gap fit analysis, and see what will be the value added of that, and then come up with a solution design, and then come up with how to maintain and so on. So the whole kind of supply chain of the blockchain consulting, the whole thing has to be integrated and provided together. And there is another company which is similar. It's called Kanergy Consulting, and this is actually based in China. So you can see the script that is there. So it's based in Beijing and Shanghai. And I'm working with them on developing. So these are some examples of the IoT platforms that they have developed, and similarly they have also done some work on blockchain. Blockchain particularly, they are interested in asset management. So some of the discussions we had yesterday afternoon would be very relevant here. So that was basically what I had. I just prepared for like half an hour so we can have more discussions. So, and these are my emails, and this is my university email, and my company, and this is my vacancy email. So, any questions so far?
Any questions, guys? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, brother. Yeah.
Thanks.